Great to have you here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hal. Thank you very much for being here. We truly appreciate it. And the floor is yours.
You're very welcome. You disappeared there, but now we're back. Here we go. Thank you for joining us. It's great to be with you and to talk about some issues that we sometimes don't think about in the midst of digital transformation, but are very, very relevant. And I suspect the fact that you showed up today signals that you're already attending to them. And hopefully we can both move forward in how we're approaching change and transitions in this digital age. What I'd like to start with is, we all know 2020 was a very unusual year, a variety of things happening. Underneath all of those things were some very significant and distinct digital issues going on, transformation, transitions. 2021, no different. And from all that we can tell, we're probably looking at the same thing in 2022. One of the interesting books that I would strongly recommend by Azeem Azhar is The Exponential Age. He takes a very thoughtful look at the world we're not only living in, but the world we're going into. I had a chance earlier this week to be working with about 30 CFOs from around the world, one of whom was from Zoom. And I asked him, what kind of growth have you had at Zoom? And he said, in the millions of percent, and he was serious about it. You can imagine the kinds of stresses and challenges and transitions they've been wrestling with this literal, in their case, and significant exponential change going on. Now, what's going on here also is, it's not just the Zoom, you well know, and I'm not going to say anything more about it, but there are all sorts of exponential activities going on, from things to robots to machine learning to fill in the blank. And Azeem's fundamental point in this book is that we are living in an exponential age where not just single exponential activities are occurring, but combinations of them are, and they are fueling like a wildfire transitions and change in our world. And he talks significantly about the gap between that kind of exponential world and the linear organizations and leadership that we live in and work in, and that gap is the challenge. So what I'd like to explore today is, how can we more effectively get into that gap that we are living through and be able to manage and navigate the human side more successfully. You probably have read about, heard about Dr. Catalin Carrico. I've had the chance to interact a bit with her. She had that sense of an exponential future over 3 decades ago, when she was asking these questions about how can you make RNA in a lab, and how can you once you do that, how can you put it into the body? She was literally laughed out of academic conferences and had very difficult time getting funding for her questions. But she could see the future and could sense that if she kept at it, she would be able to take full advantage of technology and other research to be able to push this question forward. As you well know, probably, she was key to, and others were, who were similar to her, in creating the future we're in the middle of. And one of the things that is really interesting here is that Dr. Dara Richardson Heron is at Pfizer. They were trying to figure out how to push, again, this vaccine out into the world, but first do the trials. She had spent a lifetime in government, in not-for-profit organizations, and just literally days before the pandemic lockdown became the chief patient officer at Pfizer. Her key question, given her history, deep commitment to innovation, deep commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity, it's been her entire life cause. At Pfizer, she was trying to figure out, how do we create this broader trial? She was going through these transitions, trying to make this stuff happen. And so These people are the sorts of people we love to teach and train and work with at MIT. I happen to be at the Leadership Center for about 5 years in a leadership role, and we studied, Deborah Ancona and I, what does it mean to be a leader coming out of MIT? And it was basically they're challenge-driven and they're problem-led. And if you go into Langer Lab and talk with Bob Langer, he knows how powerful questions can be as we're navigating transitions. And he was asking questions at the foundation of Moderna that were, where else might we use some of this research and insight that we've got? And his questioning and his ability to combine and recombine were crucial in moving things forward. So we've got these transitions going on. The issue, the starting point in any transition or transformation is, what's the challenge? What are we solving for? And then engaging other people in a really productive way to be able to move forward on that. That's what we mean by these challenge-driven, problem-led leaders at MIT. Now, think just for a moment, what is one of your toughest digitally driven transitions you're in the middle of right now? And I'd love you to just type into the chat box what it is. I'd love to get a sense of the terrain here real quickly. So just type in what's one of the toughest transitions you're in the middle of that has some digital component going on. Wake up. Let's get the chat going. There we go. Thank you. Zoom fatigue, like right now. Working out of a different space. Remote work, obviously hybrid, big issue. Fake news. Making sense of information. This is what we're trying to figure out. Thank you for giving me a sense of where you're at, what you're up to, what you're doing. In the work that I do, I often ask hundreds, if not thousands of people this question. This is a word cloud of their responses. I think it's reflective of what I'm seeing in this chat area right now. A huge range, lots of transitions we're in the middle of. Digital change has happened. Exponential events are in play. We are in transition, and you've certainly captured that. So given that transition, I'd invite you to think for just a moment, what is your mental map, like this map inside of this Renaissance period map? What is your mental map of how we navigate transitions when change happens? Think of your map, now compare it to mine as we go forward. Mine's a function of working in probably too many universities over the years before arriving at MIT, researching and studying early on global leaders moving to different countries and navigating and adjusting to new cultures, leading globalization. Then it was studying and researching leaders in transformation and transition. Then it was innovation and inquiry. And today it's digital-driven change. And all of that has led me into this space, literally, of how do we more effectively move the human side of a transition forward? Roger Lehman, a colleague here at MIT, and I wrote an article recently about this, and that's the foundation from which this framework is emerging. Here's how it works. Change happens, we've got to move from here to there. Our instinctual response as managers is usually to act, and that's about tasks and capabilities. What do we do? Don't just stand there, do something. And shifting capabilities matters, acquiring new skills matters, but the invitation here is to not only pay attention to that, but to step back and look more carefully at the broader context. What are the roles I am and will be taking on given this digital change? Given those roles, what are the tasks I need to learn and the capabilities to acquire? And given that, how do I manage the emotional energy so it's giving me energy instead of taking it away? Those are the three key elements. We've tried this in a lot of companies around the world, explored it with research as well as practice. And so here we go. First part of that transition curve from here to there is adjusting roles, the roles we take on. A logic that we think about easily with this is management. We move from individual contributor to manager of individual contributors to a functional manager to a general manager to a senior executive. And for example, if we don't learn early on in that first transition how to get things done through other people, we will have increasing challenges at every other level of the transition. Each of those layers, each of those roles require different capabilities and approaches. That's the logic. So here's one of the, let me get here. So here's one of the examples. Nikki Sparshot, literally a week before the lockdown in 2020, became the CEO of Unilever ANZ and the global CEO of T2, a tea company. She had to figure out, how do I take on this new role? She had not been a CEO. She had to figure out, how do I do that in the middle of a pandemic with people that I don't even know? And she was, like the rest of us, taking on just not new work roles, but she has 2 young children. Non-work roles were relevant in her world. How do we get them educated? How do we deal with that? How do I work from home? Everything we're talking about. And how do I socially interact on Zoom or with a face mask on? This is what she was dealing with, the same stuff. And so the notion here is to think of roles not just at work, but think in this middle of hybrid work that's ongoing. We have work-related roles, we have non-work-related roles, and we have social interaction roles. All of those are significantly impacted by digital change, especially in our time. So it's time to kind of step back. How have those roles shifted in my own world? Where do I need to adjust in those roles? And so as you think about that, which of those is most challenging for you? And we don't have time to poll you on it. In the data we've collected recently, it looked like this: work role adjustment. Right now, this was a program earlier this week, and social interaction adjustment, still doing this hybrid work, were the big ones. If I go backwards about 6 to 9 months, it was a reverse, where non-work role adjustment was more crucial than the work. We know that. And the idea here is to think about which of these are playing out given a digital change or transformation going on in my organization. How is it affecting roles? I had the chance to do some work in the last 12 months with the Association for Finance Professionals. Their roles are changing given all of those things I mentioned at the beginning: a pandemic, digital, etc. The first is, I have to be a finance expert role and deliver multiple points of view because of a deeply uncertain future. I have to also be a technology person. We interviewed John Murphy, who was the CEO for several years at Adobe, and he's like, I'm not a technology expert. I can't pretend to be, but I've got to master that because it's part of my role now as a CFO. Then, so you got that new role taken on. And for many functional areas, not just the finance area, the CISOs I met with earlier this week said the same thing. I have to step more and more out of my technical role into this business advisor, what is the future of our organization role? The net effect of that is people are transitioning roles. And so I often ask them in these programs that we run here at MIT, what's the most important new role you're taking on? This data set happens to come from those finance professionals. These are, again, finance professionals. Given technical change happening, they are learning how to be coaches, how to lead others more proactively, that they've never quite done before. So just think for a moment, what roles do I have? Which ones am I taking on? And as you think about that, it's where am I in this transition? There's a beginning phase, and I mentioned that I've lived in several countries like many of you. It's like you land in a new country, the beginning phase, what's surprising, what's challenging, and then over time, as you seek feedback by actively seeking passive data to figure out what's really going on, that's that middle lowest phase of adjustment in terms of roles. I realize I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm trying to figure out what to do differently. And then I start moving up with what do I do differently? Who can help? How can they help in order to master these new roles? And again, Nikki Sparshot reached out to people. John, the CFO at Adobe, reached out to people to figure out the technology part that they weren't the experts in as they were trying to navigate these role transitions. That's the process. Those are some of the good diagnostic questions we can consider here. Now, so think to yourself, where am I right now on the crucial roles in this transition that I'm in the middle of? Again, we recently asked folks, beginning, middle, movement going up, or mastery. It's a whole range. And what I find super helpful here is not only thinking about myself, my roles that I have, and the new ones I'm taking on, it's what about a 360 view of my world? What about my manager, my peers? If I have direct reports, what about them? My clients, the suppliers, the same story. If we step back away from the hectic pace of the moment, we can more effectively understand how are these roles shifting and do something about it. I don't have time to go into this, but here's the notion. Given these roles, given the changes, given where I'm at, I'm going to be adjusting those roles. How do I see that role? How do other stakeholders see the role? And what is it actually? I'm not going to go through all these questions. We'll make this available. But there's some diagnostics to think through and navigate and manage the inevitable conflict that might happen as we're adjusting roles from here to there. And that's the spirit of this. We're trying to increase autonomy. There's some work by psychologist Edward Deci and colleagues around self-determination theory. It's really, we're trying to increase autonomy here and reduce ambiguity, conflict, and overload when we're working with these roles. So that's the first part. Once roles start shifting, then it becomes, okay, capabilities. When I have to take on this coaching role as a finance professional in the middle of a digital transformation, I've got to learn some new capabilities. And that's really an S curve or a learning curve that I'm going to go up. So when the pandemic hit, they were in the middle of making the Soul movie and the Luca movies at Pixar. Fortunately, their IT and systems people had looked far enough ahead before the pandemic to move them off of workstations, high-end workstations in the offices, given their platform. They actually were off that. They were able to work from home, but it's an incredibly creative space at Pixar, trying to figure out how do you do this innovative work from a distance. So they were trying to, first, what do we stop doing? And it's interesting, when we're learning new capabilities, we often have to stop doing something else. As I asked folks, what's one capability you're stop using? You can see, here's a sense of it. A lot of it is, given these role transitions and the intensity of them and learning new tasks, I can't manage as detailed and have as much oversight as I used to have. That's what's going on in a lot of this. I've got to stop doing that. Then the issue is, what do I start doing? And so, again, I'm curious. I'm going to look into the chat here for just a second. What is one new capability or skill you're trying to learn right now as you are navigating this digitally driven transition? What's one new skill you're in the middle of learning? Please, I'd love to see them. The skill required to basically take on that new role. technical skills, cognitive skills, leadership, it looks like. Again, a combination of technical, being more focused. One person said, I've got to be hyper vigilant about managing my time. More direction, what are we solving for? Enabling others. And the spirit of it here in any of these with ourselves or others, and let me just give you a sense of these are some of those new roles, skills people were learning. This is the logic about moving up that curve. It comes from motivation theory, expectancy theory, and three fundamental questions. What do I do? And when digital transformations are happening, that is often very unclear. And we're trying to figure out what is the new thing I have to do. The second question becomes, can I do it? In other words, if I try, can I do it? And this is a function of, do I know, I know what it is, that's what I do, but do I have the resources, the technology, the skills, the practice, the experience, the aptitude, all those things to be able to actually do it? Then once I learn how to do it, it's like, will I actually do it? I know what you want me to do, and I've become capable of doing it. The will part is rewards that are intrinsic and extrinsic. You aggregate those outcomes together, and if they're more negative than positive, even though I know what you want me to do, I won't. And so just this week, I had the chance to visit with Jen Felch, an MIT grad, who's the chief digital officer and CIO at Dell Technologies. From the start of Dell, they've had a mainframe computer group. These are experts at their tandem mainframe work. They've done it for literally a couple of decades. They, before the pandemic, made a decision around, we're finally going to move away from having a mainframe here at Dell. Imagine the worry and the concern, first of all, roles shifting for these folks running that mainframe to what's next. And what I really appreciate about Jen is she learned early on in a manufacturing environment at Dell that people have real impact from change, and technology was changing, and these sophisticated, talented mainframe operators and programmers, they were having a role shift. She took courage, went down, talked with them face to face, learned their concerns. Some of their concerns were simply about losing their jobs, others about what am I going to do? And literally, they created an upskilling, reskilling program to move them into a different space and put them on teams with younger people working in other areas of Dell, trying to solve challenges that were crucial to Dell's future. And those teams actually, she discovered, were more productive afterwards than without these talented people from the mainframe tandem area. All I'm trying to say here is that Jen was exceptional at asking these three questions. What is the new thing these people need to do? How can I create the resources, technology, training, et cetera, and experience for them to learn the new skills and make it rewarding for them so they're not thinking of just fearful outcomes? So that's the process in terms of this capability stuff. What do I do? Can I do it? Will I do it? So, where are you right now on that shifting capabilities curve? It's a diagnostic question. Think of yourself. In the data that we've collected, this is pretty consistent over the last few years. People are at all different phases, depending on what skill and capability they're in the middle of learning. And so we're creating an image in our mind of ourselves and others if we're in leadership roles. What's my role at work, outside of work? Where am I on that role adjustment curve there? What are the new skills and capabilities I'm shifting to and acquiring? Where am I on that curve? And then I step back as a good leader, and it's like, what about the people all around me? And if I don't have honestly good answers to those two questions, which is, what are the new roles these people are taking on? What does that require of them to learn in terms of skills and capabilities? And what am I doing about helping them navigate through those two areas. If I come up short about good, solid, confident answers about roles and capabilities, I'm going to have a real difficult time in the next part. These diagnostic questions can help us get the capabilities down, but the next part is managing emotional energy. If I don't know for other people's role shifting and capability shifting and where they are and where they're going, they're going to be really hesitant to be honest with me about what they're really feeling and how it could move forward. And what we're doing with both roles and capabilities, when we push a digital change into an organization, we're asking them to jump from a peak of competence, they know what they're doing, to a valley of incompetence as they start this new role or capability. For most people, that's frightening. For some with a super good growth mindset, they're actually excited to go and take that leap because it's a new opportunity. But for many, it's a worry and a concern. And so what we're doing with that earlier work around roles and capabilities is actually helping us lay the foundation of psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson in her great book, Fearless Organizations, talks about. It lays that foundation so we can talk about emotions. Now, a couple of years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, I gave a talk on this similar topic around for the alumni of MIT. We had Navigating the Human Side of Transitions as the original title, but the concern there was if we put the human side in, the MIT alumni might not show up. So they took it out. And here's the point. We might want to take out that human side, especially the emotional side, but it is just as important as the other two parts of this curve. So here are the diagnostic questions for this one. Where am I, first of all, emotionally? Am I living in the future, afraid, or whatever? Am I living in the past, or am I here, fully present, here and now? And we often have asked people, what's one of the most fearful questions during the past 18 months to sort of start this conversation? And especially when we're working with intact groups within organizations, you can see their fearful questions are really around existential threats and people potentially dying from the pandemic. This was early on, the responses we were getting. These things are still there, and it's just important to remember there is a lot of emotional terrain going on underneath a digital transformation or transition. So where am I? Then it becomes, what do I feel? This article, maybe you've read it because it's the most downloaded article at Harvard Business Review. What did that discomfort you're feeling is grief. We don't normally talk about grief, but it's crucial in our times and in transitions because grief is a response to significant loss. When we have transitions, we lose something. One way of thinking about this, is to think about what have been some of the significant losses you've experienced in the last 18 months. And those losses could range from the ability to go to the restaurant, to the ability to be with my family, to losing literally a family member, to losing my job, to fill in the blank. I'd like to see again, please type in, what are some of the losses that have been significant to you?
Hal, while people are typing that, I had a question for you, which is very interesting
Okay.
based on this question, which is that how often do you find that organizational leaders are attuned to the fact that they need to reach into the holistic experience of their teams like this? Or do they just sort of think my relationship and responsibility ends at the demarcation line between work and the rest of life?
So my response to that, Zenon, is that If I look at the most innovative companies in the world, which I studied for a decade with Clayton Christensen and Jeff Dyer, we created that list on Forbes. And so if you encounter Mark Benioff and have a chance to work with him, one of the co-founders of Salesforce, Mark's one of those who was not only very innovative and tries to create an innovative organization, but when the pandemic hit, all of those innovation and questioning skills pivoted instantly, first internally towards the people. Where are they? What's going on? What's happening to them? What's happening outside of work? How's that impacting work? And from that, they rapidly built up a site internally to create and share information. And they already had in place an airing of grievances section in their chat area, their Slack sort of chat area. And they were already talking about the tough issues. And so what's going on here is that I would say, and my observation is, the best of the best leaders, Indra Nooyi, who was at Pepsi until recently as the CEO, she's exactly like this. She's exactly like Nikki Sparshott. What's fascinating, I mentioned Nikki from Unilever. When she became the CEO at the beginning of the pandemic, her instinctual response was to get into meetings with people before the pandemic. Her questions were, what do we need to do and how do we do it? And that's the very action-oriented. It's like, what do we do? But she realized we're in a different world, and she literally systematically changed her questions, starting questions in any Zoom conversation. So if she were getting on the call with you or me, it would be, hi, how are you doing? And then it's questions around, who are you? Tell me about the painting on your wall, the dog that just barked by, or the kid in your lap that I can hear in the corner. I want to learn about you. Who are you? And then the question is, why do you even show up at Unilever? And she's trying to explore the intent and what really is meaningful to this person. And she said, I realized my role, even though I'm the CEO in the middle of the biggest digital transformation we've ever experienced at Unilever, I am the chief emotion or engagement officer. And she said, I learned to create more intimacy through a camera than I had created in person because I paid attention to their world. Now, she's doing that first because she simply cares about people and where are they. But that foundation gets laid in all that work for an organization that behaves the same to be able to move it forward. Does that help, Sinan?
Indeed, that's a fantastic example. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I had the chance to look through some of these, and there's a huge range of things that have gone on. Like Christina, I feel for your losses. We had a grandson who was born in 2020, and because of the pandemic, and he died 5 weeks later, we never held that little boy. And this has been a very hard couple of years, and it's not abating. It's not instantly going away. So I just really, I empathize with you. And when we put up these word clouds in the course of the work we do in the workshops here at MIT, it's just a stark reminder. We are people, we are humans in the middle of a human transition. And it's bigger than the work that we're in the middle of. So what we have to do is acknowledge those feelings, create a way to mourn and just work through that grief of loss. And if we don't, we get stuck. Now, this is the Kubler-Ross curve from when people have passed away. She described it as the stages of emotion that we experience. The research suggests that it isn't necessarily stages, and we don't have to experience all of this when we lose something significant in our lives. But it's a helpful way of thinking about it. And we asked Nikki Sparshott, what about you, your emotional energy? And like, what are you feeling? This is the question. The first one is, where am I? Then is, how are you feeling? And for Nikki, at the beginning of this transition, it wasn't denial, but it was just confusion and fear. 5 days after becoming the CEO, a lockdown. She said, I never felt anger, but midway through that downward point, it was like frustration and anxiety. Then it was pure overwhelmed. And that's when she doubled down on being hyper vigilant about managing her time. And then she reached out. Who else could help me? And she told her story. Go online. She tells a great story on LinkedIn. And then once she got moving on, she was clearly committed to others, but she was very aware of the emotions going on for herself. And so that's how I would like to think about it. It's like, okay, where am I? Am I here now? What am I feeling? And can we talk about it? And if we can't talk about our feelings, it is not a psychologically safe space. If those mainframe folks at Dell could not talk honestly with Jen Felch, the chief digital officer, about their concerns with the transition, that transition will get stuck. And so that's why this matters so much, is if we don't navigate the emotional terrain, we get stuck. Now, a fun example here of someone who I just admire her story. Dr. Lisa Su currently is the CEO of AMD. And she's an MIT graduate, got her master's and PhD here. But what you've got is, she said, the best piece of advice I got when I was young was to run towards problems, which she did when she became the CEO of AMD in the around 2013, I believe, 2014. AMD was at the worst possible scenario you could imagine in terms of their performance. You can see where it's gone since then. She's challenge-driven, problem-led, bigger than her or the challenges. She engages others, but she had to learn how to do that, a new skill. Early on in her career as a young manager, someone asked her, Lisa, do you talk to your people? Yes, I talk to my people. Well, how often? All the time. What do you talk about? Do you ever ask them how they feel? Am I supposed to ask that? She's like, I treat people the way I like to be treated, and I don't expect someone to ask me how I feel, but I just expect to talk about the work. Comes back to your question and comment earlier, Sinan, that you shared from the other people, which is, she learned early on, it's not just technology, it's also emotion, which requires that emotional connection. Now, skip through that. It's like, ask yourself, how comfortable am I talking about this? And that's what we need to do, is create that sort of safe space where we can explore these emotions that are part of the transition. And as Nikki said here, it creates magic. Now, this is the final piece before we finish up. When I was studying globalization 30 years ago, and then transformation and change 20 years ago, and then innovation in the most innovative companies in the world, all of those leaders leading change in one form or another were exceptional at asking questions. And again, I just interviewed Jen Felch this week on a project that we're in the middle of about how can we ask AI better questions, and how can AI help us ask better questions. In the middle of that conversation, I asked Jen, how important, or what's the role of questions as you lead others through these technical transitions, technically driven transitions at Dell and beyond? And she said, it is crucial. Questions are crucial. So that's where I'm going to finish here, which is, these are some diagnostic questions around how do we manage the emotional energy. I shared those questions about acquiring capabilities. What do I do? Can I do it? Will I do it? I shared a few around adjusting roles. And then what I'd like to finish with here is that questions are super powerful. They're an energy giver when we get stuck in any kind of transition. Oprah Winfrey may not be a digital technologist, but she's certainly an expert. She's certainly an expert in transitions. She's thought about the power of questions. Her fundamental question is, what is your intent? What are we solving for? What is your intent? Is one of the most crucial recursive questions we can ask. And some of those questions take energy, other questions give energy. She learned over the course of her life to put her energy on energy-giving questions. Instead of asking, what if others don't like me? It's, what life can I touch? That took a lot of hard work. What we've discovered in working with people about the power of questions in transitions, we ask them, what's the most frequently asked questions? The top of the layer is, what are we solving for? Because people are literally trying to figure out in uncertainty what's going forward. And the issue becomes, which ones give us energy and which ones take energy? And you can see from here, some give, some take. Now, myself, for a lot of reasons in my history, I have history of how will I ever get it all done? Those are energy-taking questions. The pandemic brought them to the forefront. I had to change my questions to more a very different kind. What can I do here and now to make progress? That's the spirit of this. So what I'd like to do here right at the end, literally, is an exercise with you about questioning. I had the chance to interview 200 of the best questioners in the world, founders and CEOs of these sorts of companies, people like Elon Musk, who know questions are important in the work he does, and they do. What I discovered there was that these CEOs, they are exceptional at asking great questions. And what I want to do right now is just, I'm going to skip forward to something that's going to help us ask better questions whenever we get stuck. We have to put ourselves in conditions where we are wrong, uncomfortable, and reflectively quiet. And this is important enough that I want to do it in the last 2 minutes we have. That's what I'm trying to say is, when we are in situations where we are wrong and challenged, uncomfortable and surprised and quietly reflective, we get new questions that get us unstuck. So here's what I want you to do. Think of your challenge, remember the power of inquiry, get your computer, your tablet, or your phone. I want you to take 60 seconds, and write down all of the possible questions you can imagine about your challenge where you're currently stuck. Will you do that? Don't answer your questions in your head. Don't try to figure out context or explain why you're asking them. Just try to get at least 5 questions in the next 60 seconds. Write them down as fast as you can about your challenge. Go. Now, it's about 60 seconds. Here's what I want to remind us of. We just created the conditions for you to be wrong and uncomfortable if you ask a tough question. We certainly forced you to be reflectively quiet. Here's what we know from the data. Before just asking questions, people they're not that, they are actually this. Let me show you. Excuse me. Before doing it, it looks like that. Frustration, overwhelmed, anxious. Afterwards, it looks like that. 85% of the time, people feel better about their challenge. 80% of the time, they've reframed it, which means they were wrong and uncomfortable. 80% of the time, 85% of the time, they get a new idea. All I'm trying to suggest here at the end is that when you're stuck in any part of your transition, adjusting roles, shifting capabilities, managing emotional energy, if you just take a moment yourself or with someone you trust or with your team when you're stuck on the challenge, generate nothing but questions, you will make at least incremental progress, be in a more positive emotional state, and it will help nudge your transition forward. So that's what I'm trying to suggest here. My final point here is I love this notion from Elie Wiesel. And the word question there is a beautiful word, quest. I love that word. We're all partners in a quest. You are my question, I'm yours, then there is dialogue. The moment we have answers, there is no dialogue. Questions unite people, answers divide them. When we're in the middle of transitions and change, Bea's colleague Ed Schein here calls that be an ask leader, not a tell leader. Engage in dialogue. Expand your framework if you need to around, adjusting roles, shifting capabilities, paying attention to all of that, managing emotional energy. And we've found that framework to be powerful to create connection moving forward instead of disconnection. So that's where we're at. I'd love to get questions here in the next few minutes that we've got together.
Thanks very much, Hal. As I wrote down my questions, I'm realizing that 3 out of the 4 that I wrote down are written in sort of that negative prose. What's kind of the trick or the trade to make them more thoughtful questions rather than the negative ones?
2 suggestions. My first suggestion is, honestly, let me get this, I'm just going to pull this off. There we go. My first suggestion on that, well, it's that classic managing multiple screens. Let me get off that and get this where it needs to be. And then you have, I'm sorry. Well, in the interest of time, let me get this stupid thing back. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Sorry, David. 2 things. What are we solving for at the bigger level almost always helps me ask more productive questions. Taking that step back bigger, what's the bigger picture, helps me ask the more positive question. The second part is being aware of it like you are. Doing this question burst regularly can actually surface what are the patterns in my questions. And once I see the patterns, I can start exploring alternatives. And the other part is doing this question burst process with somebody else helps me uncover sometimes questions I haven't even thought of about the issue. And one of the things we suggest actually in when we're working with companies is do a question audit, David. It's literally write down all the questions for a 24-hour period. You hear, you think, and you say. Look at the patterns. Getting that baseline data is a really helpful, it's a great audit. And it also gives us a sense of how psychologically safe is the environment around me, which then gives me the ability to see, oh, if I go and start talking with somebody about their roles and capabilities, it doesn't feel very safe around here. And they're going to be instantly fearful. Does that help?
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I was thinking is, walking through the stages of grief. I actually am familiar with those because a few years ago, lost a member of my family and tried to discover ways of dealing with grief, and going through each of these stages was in a thoughtful way was interesting. I hadn't really considered it for the pandemic, but I was talking with somebody the other day saying, look, this is one of those big existential impacts on our lives. We weren't around for maybe the Vietnam War or World War II or the Great Depression. Those were existential challenges in other times. And I think this pandemic is another one.
Well, and David, it's not only the pandemic is an existential challenge, arguably global climate change is an existential challenge, arguably social injustice holds the seeds of potentially being that, arguably even digital transformation in the world we're going into. And then if you start combining those things, that's why I feel so strongly, and we feel so strongly, that creating a better framework to navigate these transitions is not only important today, but it's like super crucial for that world we're going into. And I'm just going to say that one word again. Every change involves loss. And loss means grief. And are we creating a safe enough space to explore that as we help people move from here to there?
For sure. If there's anybody else in the seminar that would like to come off mute and show their picture and ask a question, feel free to do so. This is a bit of a different seminar in that it's difficult to ask technical questions in chat. It's more of a, how do you feel and what's your response? Irving, I see you there. Would you like to pose a question or make a comment?
Well, Hal, as you were talking about, how do we get through the emotional pain? I don't know if you called it emotional pain, but this is what came to mind. So, I had a long career at IBM and I got a number of promotions. Every time I got a new job, and these were jobs I was very excited about, but when I first got the job, my first reaction was panic. Was, holy shit, what am I going to be able to do? But then, as I reflect back, in every single case, the way to get over the panic was to reach out to people, was to start talking to people about the job. And I have a feeling what happened is that I realized the panic was, I have to do this all by myself. And I don't even know where to begin. And when I started talking to people, I realized I don't have to do this all by myself. I can reach out, they will help me. Is that related to the same things that you're talking about here?
Irving, it is exactly what we're talking about, seriously. And I used to teach a program for first-time managers that just got promoted into that role, and they were just like you described. It's like, holy cow, I have no clue what to do, but there was this feeling, I have to be perfect in what I do. And when they got in a room with 30 other people who were first-time managers, they're like, oh, wow, everybody else is experiencing the same thing. So I am totally with you that unfortunately the pandemic has increased isolation and loneliness, and that flies right in the face of being able to manage this transition better. And so when we are inviting people with the digital work we're doing, it is frightening to most people because we have less of an experience base with digital transformation than we do with something like a restructuring of the organization. And so a ton of people are saying exactly what you said, Irving, and feeling that. And what we have to do is create those forums, those spaces, individually and collectively, where they can acknowledge this is what's going on. Here's how I'm feeling. And how can we then move forward? And that how can you help me is pivotal. And how can I help you? If there's one person I would suggest as a role model here, it's Clayton Christensen. I had the chance to be a friend and a colleague with Clay over the years. I don't care whether it was in a personal conversation or a professional conversation. Clay always would ask me, how? What are you wrestling with? How can I help? Always. Sure. And Clay, if you know Clay, which is you'd always walk away from the conversation with a new question, a way of looking at the world, but you also knew that he was creating a safe space where you could explain, here's my challenge. And he would ask, how can I help, inviting that kind of process.
Awesome. Belma, bring us home with the last question.
Actually, my question was a little bit answered. So thank you, Hal. This was a great conversation. But one of the things that I have, when I see the title, it was like, oh my God, this is what I have gone through or still going through. When we went through this whole COVID, I lead the innovation and collaboration programs at 3M. And many of
Mhm.
our collaboration things were like in person. We are in the conference room with our post-it notes, ideating, finding, ways to engage. And they were completely gone. And many of the people in my team were so used to that person-to-person interactions. And when we had to shift everything to virtual, which I do the learning programs as well, they struggled quite a lot, because suddenly I asked them like, okay, then we are going to be just shifting to virtual. This is great. Now we are a global company. Everybody can join from anywhere in the world, but didn't realize that they do not have that digital skills as much as the personal skills that they could do it in the in-person environment. So for a while, I realized, everything slowed down. And what I came to a realization that they don't know. And they don't want to admit it that they don't know, because their confidence just shaken. They felt like they lost the control of being an expert in that space. So, and we, get together, and I said, like, I don't know either, but we know that we need to do something. And as Irving said, like, how can we reach out to people who know that we can learn from it and move forward? It was a struggle, but definitely that, putting the classes and everything online was one thing, but that human side, we lost it at some point. I'm like, yeah, just go and do it. What do you mean you don't know?
Yeah. No, Belma, it reminds me of two things. Number one, Belma, keep your microphone on. I'm very curious about the photograph behind you. Could you briefly, you comfortable telling us the story behind that?
Yes, it is actually hand drawn with the black pen, is a Constantinople. It's before it became Istanbul. So I'm from Turkey originally, and that is, if as far as I can tell, I think it's around 17th century. Constantinople.
When you look at
from
that,
the Golden Horn and Galata Bridge.
That's okay. That's what I was trying to get the context there. Thank you. So Belma, I was very curious about your photo there and the image. So thanks for sharing that. And in the spirit of when you're tossing people into that virtual world, what I've realized is modeling that sort of, tell me about your world. I didn't know you were from Istanbul in Turkey, and Ahmet Bozer, who used to run
Coca-Cola
International for Coca-Cola. Ahmet has a painting behind him that's from Turkey that tells the whole story about his world, and it's so meaningful to him, the bridge between two continents and worlds and so on. So that's the beginning point, I think, of making these transitions work is what we're doing right now. And the second part, your thought reminded me of a quote from Jeff Wilkie, an MIT graduate who has now started Rebuild Manufacturing, where I asked Jeff, how do you ask the better questions, especially in times of transitions? And I'm going to read his quote because and I didn't pay him to say this. It's like, he said, Hal, if you never ask questions and you never experience anything new, your model becomes stale. So Irving, you were experiencing all this new stuff and your model was not becoming stale. You were like, oh, now what, here and now? And then he said, but if you seek out things you don't know, his first job, they asked him to be at corporate headquarters in the strategy department out of university. And he said, nope, I want to be in a manufacturing plant in a unionized environment where there's a lot of conflict. He was trying to learn some important new things. And he said, if you don't seek out things you don't know, have courage to be wrong, be ignorant, saying you don't know something, to ask more questions and maybe be embarrassed, then I think you will build a more complete model. And that model serves you well over the course of your life. And so I think that's what you were inviting those people to do, Belma, is be like Jeff is doing and just go into that uncomfortable zone. It's okay, I don't know. We're in this together. Let's move forward.
And that served Jeff well, and as well as Amazon and his new gig as well. Hal, thank you very much for a very helpful and insightful seminar to end the year. We wish all of you a good holiday season, and we'll see you back here for the spring seminar series. And Andreas, thank you for posting a link in chat on Hal's question burst toolkit. So I encourage all of you to read more on Hal's work. Thanks again, Hal. Be well, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.